A look at the Capitol on the eve of the 100-day mark since the deadly insurrection at the U.S. Capitol, which laid bare the virtually unchecked threat posed by the violent extremists and radicalized supporters incited by Donald Trump and enabled by his allies in the GOP. And what could be an alarming indication of the efforts to tamp down radicalization and prevent a January 6th-style attack from happening again, we're now staring down 100 days without a 9/11-style commission being established to study the security failures that led to lives lost on that day. It's a reality House Speaker Nancy Pelosi today blamed on Republicans, suggesting they're reviving Donald Trump's old talking points about Antifa and Black Lives Matter protesters to avoid confronting the threat posed by MAGA extremists. Watch.
It's not about reviewing the elections. It's not about examining Black Lives Matter. It's about what happened on January 6th and how we can prevent it from happening again. But I'm optimistic because quite frankly, we have to have a commission, in my view. We have to find the truth.
Today, a small House committee, 9 members in all, met to address a damning watchdog report first reported on by the New York Times on the significant lapses and miscalculations that led to the failure of police to contain the historic domestic threat, citing intelligence that established prior to the attack, quote, Congress itself is the target on the 6th. The 2 protests, expected to be the largest of the day, may draw thousands of participants, and both have been promoted by President Trump himself. This, combined with Stop the Steal's propensity to attract white supremacists, militia members, and others who actively promote violence, may lead to a significantly dangerous situation for law enforcement and the general public alike. In today's hearing with Capitol Police Inspector General Michael Bolton, who was behind that watchdog report that exposed that intelligence, House Administration Committee Chairperson Zoe Lofgren underscored the grave consequences of the security lapse.
Officers lost their lives as a result of this horrific attack. Scores more, not just from the Capitol Police, but other responding agencies suffered grievous injuries. For example, officers were viciously beaten with flagpoles, including some displaying Blue Lives Matter flags and the American flag. They were assaulted with powerful bear spray and other chemicals. An officer was crushed in a heavy door as he was attacked. An officer who was beaten so badly she lost consciousness. Another officer lost an eye. Another lost fingers. Another officer had his own taser used against him to the point that he suffered a heart attack. The January 6th attack was a horrific, traumatic event for everyone who was present, their families and loved ones, and those who witnessed it, for the whole country.
Joining our conversation, Democratic Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger of Virginia. She's a former CIA officer and now a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee. Matt Miller and Julian Barnes are also with us. Congresswoman, just listening to the mutilation and beating and abuse of the Capitol Police at the hands of Trump supporters who were there for his event, walked down to the Capitol with their eyes set on Congress and all of you. It feels like more than a failure. It just feels like a disgrace that no commission has been established to look at this. Do you share the Speaker's optimism that one will be?
We have to put one in place. And I think even to give additional context to that day, to remind everyone of the severity of what was happening, we, members of Congress, were in session that day to acknowledge the results of the November 2020 election. We were doing our constitutional duty on the day that the Capitol was attacked. And I was in the House chamber when the attack occurred. The last group to be evacuated out. And when we were evacuated out, it was past the protesters who were thrown down on the ground. This is, hours into the attack once the police officers were able to actually gain control of the situation. But the beatings, what we've now seen from video footage, the barbaric nature of this event, on the day that we were performing a constitutional duty, it was an attack on our very democracy. And we absolutely need a commission to understand what happened and also to understand the weaknesses here at the Capitol that put our Capitol police officers in such a perilous circumstance and our democracy itself.
You served in the CIA, and I wonder, as you watch our intelligence agencies reorient themselves to really focus in on what Christopher Wray testified to over the summer while Trump was still there is the greatest threat to the homeland, and that's domestic violent extremists here in the country. Can you just talk about that shift in orientation from threats abroad to threats, at least in the case of the insurrection, proudly aligned not just with one party, but with its former leader, Donald Trump?
Well, on the ground, I think that for quite some time we've been seeing the startling challenges of growing conspiracy theories, a willingness to just dismiss actual facts and align with whole conspiracies that are destabilizing from a larger standpoint in terms of the function of our government, the importance of regular civic society. And to see the intelligence community, to see particularly the FBI and Director Wray talk about the challenges that we as a nation face, and be wide-eyed, because from my background as a former CIA case officer, the number one thing you had to do was be wide-eyed and clear-eyed on the threats that were posed, because the only way that you can address them is by understanding the scope and the potential severity of the threats that we as a nation face, be it international terrorism, be it threats of domestic terrorism. So I'm appreciative of the significant work of our law enforcement officials, our FBI agents, and our intelligence community writ large in their efforts to truly understand the threats that exist at home and abroad, so that we as lawmakers can be part of moving forward to contend with them.
I worked for George W. Bush on 9/11, and he went to a mosque right after 9/11 to make clear that in holding those accountable, it would have nothing to do with the Muslim faith, that it would be a response to the terrorists themselves. You look at how Republicans and right-wing media have responded to the insurrection, and they can't go so far as to say the insurrectionists are bad. Republican Party is for a whole bunch of good stuff. They've taken the opposite approach of that. They've broadened the tent to say the insurrectionists are us, we are them. Ron Johnson has called them lively and friendly. Tucker Carlson has gone out of his way to defend various aspects of what that group at the Capitol on January 6th did. From a DVE perspective, how dangerous is that to trying to separate out the ones that represent a threat?
Normalizing domestic violent extremists is horrifically dangerous. And as someone who was in the House chamber on the day of that attack, as our Capitol police officers who were there with us were stacking up tables and benches and screaming at protesters to get back, guns drawn, screaming at us to get down on the ground because they were worried we might be impacted if they did need to fire their weapon. We were there when a Capitol police officer did indeed fire on the crowd that was trying to come in. So this threat was real, and we've seen the images of police officers being beaten by American flags. So I think that any American who values our democracy, who values the very foundation of our democracy, should be resolute in denouncing that anyone who would violently beat police officers, break through the windows of the United States Capitol, and attempt to stop the United States Congress from recognizing the results of an election just because they don't like those results, they should be roundly denounced across the board without any consternation. And the fact that we see exactly that consternation, I think, is deeply dangerous, because what happened on January 6th was one event, but it's part of a trend where we see people creating a reality in which they want to live, not being willing to recognize the truth. And those conspiracies are problematic because they create fertile ground for the people who want to go that next step, for the domestic violent extremists who, on the fertile ground that is fertile because of conspiracy theories, that is, people are disoriented because what is up, what is down, they are then able to take hold. And through hate, through anti-democratic values and a focus, they can perpetuate the type of attack that we saw on January 6th. And so any person with any sort of voice in our community and our government should be denouncing the absolute abuses and violence that we saw on that day.
Do you have private conversations with Republicans who understand what you just explained? I mean, are they just publicly afraid of the Republican base, but privately acknowledge what you just articulated?
I think it's a shift. I think there's people kind of across the spectrum. I think there are some who have been, each way, right? When the election first happened and people were disappointed, my voters aren't happy with the results, so I'm going to wait until the states certify, and then the states certify. Well, I'm not going to recognize Joe Biden yet because I'm going to wait till the Electoral College votes. Okay, now the Electoral College votes. Well, my base is still unhappy. I'll wait until January 6th when Congress acknowledges it. And so each place along the line, when I think people have the real ability to say, hey guys, I'm sorry, the person I wanted to win didn't win. I'm disappointed. The other guy won, but that's our democracy. So many people didn't demonstrate that level of leadership. And I think that contributed significantly to the fact that people bought into this big lie because no one told them it wasn't a lie, or that no one told them that it wasn't true and that it was a lie.
Right.
So at this point, I think the more vocal that my colleagues, certainly across the board, but certainly across the aisle on the Republican side, the more vocal they can be in acknowledging this big lie, it's incredibly important to the safety of our democracy. And some people just want to focus forward, but there has to be discussion of what went wrong and how allowing this lie to permeate among our constituents led to the devastating and deadly attack that we witnessed on January 6th.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.